Welcome to Surrey's on-demand PSHE training. This session focuses upon the essential principles of PSHE and it supports the development of your Surrey Healthy Schools approach to wellbeing, health, inclusion and achievement. This training is part of a suite of PSHE supports provided by Surrey County Council. My name is Sarah Lyles and I'm the PSHE Wellbeing and Surrey Healthy Schools lead for the local authority.
And I'm Joanna Feast. I'm an independent PSHE and wellbeing consultant and I work closely with Sarah across Surrey.
So the aim of this training today is it's designed to help build your PSHE knowledge, skills and understanding, and it's designed to help develop high quality, holistic, needs-led PSHE provision in our schools. Across Surrey's PSHE training and support, there is a focus on addressing equality, stereotyping, building and maintaining healthier and more respectful relationships. And throughout our PSHE resources, we consider the interrelatedness of PSHE and its importance in addressing inequalities for children, young people, school staff, services, partners, and the wider community. We consider what comprises high-quality PSHE pedagogy and how this contributes to a whole system when we're talking across Surrey and a whole school approach. We consider the crucial nature of an evidence-based perspective in PSHE to enable everyone in Surrey to share normative, strengths-based, inclusive and trauma-informed approaches within our work. Throughout this session, we encourage you to reflect upon your own PSHE practice and your own practice within your schools in order to meet children's needs. We encourage you to reflect on and identify your own areas of effective practice and consider how your practice and provision can be further strengthened. So this session will support many of the Surrey Healthy Schools themes and standards, but I've selected a few just to demonstrate this for you here. As you can see, it very much supports theme 1, which is your whole school approach towards the positive promotion of health and wellbeing. Looking at leadership and management, is there named leadership for PSHE? And is priority given to quality first teaching and learning? So two standards within theme 1 that this training addresses. Also theme 2, PSHE, looking at whether we've got spiralling curriculums, developmentally progressive in place, and we'll hear a bit about that from Joanna later in today's session. And also giving consideration to the monitoring within your school in PSHE and whether your monitoring processes help to identify what your pupils need within their PSHE curriculum. The training today also has huge support for theme 5, which is health, emotional wellbeing and mental health, but I've just kept it to the 2 for keeping it simple.
Now, as for the content of today's training, we're going to cover in various different ways these aspects of PSHE. I won't run through them all now because we'll go through them later, but they're in no particular order and they're really here to offer some structure or a framework to how we start to look at PSHE in a little bit more depth. So throughout today's session, we'll cover each of these 10 different things.
Thank you. So just coming on from what Joanna has just said, we saw the first one, which was about having evidence-based practice. As you can see, we take an evidence-based approach, an informed approach to the PSHE that we support in Surrey. So effective PSHE is normative. We can see that on the slide at the top. A normative approach helps children and young people to understand what their peers are actually doing And by understanding what people are actually doing, it generally generates increasingly positive behaviours. Normative education is based upon being aware of the actuality of something rather than just relying on a perception of what people may think is going on. So school-based, local and national data, both qualitative and quantitative data, can really assist in ensuring that a curriculum and a school culture applies a normative, or sometimes called a social norms, approach. The healthy choices and decisions made by young people are often underestimated, and normative approaches in PSHE promote positive behaviours and can really go to strengthen the resolve of young people. Moving on to a strengths base, which you can see on the slide, it kind of takes the normatives and just takes it on that little bit further, but it is very complementary. So strengths-based approach should identify what a person is already able to do, and then that approach then it builds upon this and takes them forwards, and it helps them to develop competence and confidence positively and with purpose. It's really important to apply this approach to the development of skills, knowledge and understanding, and when reflecting upon attitudes and values. And this approach is really strongly linked to effective assessment, because without that effective assessment, it's really hard to know what a person is already good at and where the gaps may be. The next part on the slide you can see is trauma-informed. So it's really important for school staff to consider that pupils and staff will have been impacted by a range of situations that have been difficult or even traumatic. Trauma-informed classrooms and environments aim to be compassionate, kind, empathetic and safe. And these elements are often in line with a school's vision, intent, and also your PSHE ground rules, which we will talk about in a little while. School staff often have a really in-depth understanding and knowledge of the needs of pupils and their community, and are therefore ideally placed to plan lessons and take into consideration how best to address a range of situations, ensuring that lessons avoid elements that may induce fear or cause shock. It's really important that the teachers are really considerate about that. Moving on to the next element, we can see it says restorative. So lessons should be restorative in nature and employ restorative approaches. And those approaches support pupils and also staff to appreciate the importance of recognising and working to meet emotional need. Restorative approaches do not necessarily fix a problem, they seek to repair harm. And such an approach can help schools to create peaceful, confident and respectful citizens, and increasingly reflective and effective contributors. And of course, it's really important that any way of working impacts the whole system, or in a school's sense, the whole school, as we can see on the next element on this slide. This includes all staff. This includes all your policies, procedures, through pupil voice, the curriculum, and that is both your formal curriculum and your informal curriculum, through the vision, the values and the culture of the schools, and where appropriate, working with parents, carers and the wider community, so taking everybody with you. And inclusive. So inclusive, it means, where we're really going to reduce or even eliminate barriers to education. It's about environments where people can express who they are, where they feel safe from unfair criticism and harassment. And being inclusive and having an inclusive environment is central to both diversity and equity. And you can see how these 6 elements, which we use to underpin the Surrey approach to PSHE, are very much interrelated. So I could talk at length about what guidance and research there is about PSHE, but I'm going to try and stick to the main elements. However, I do want to just point out that there is a legacy of evidence stemming from the 1970s. However, the roots go so much further back than that. Many underpinnings for effective PSHE and inclusive school curriculums can be found within the 1944 Education Act, but again, go much further back than that even. Keeping it to more recent times, in 2018, the government passed an amendment to the Children and Social Work Bill to make relationships and health education statutory from September 2020 in primary schools, and relationships and sex and health education statutory in secondary schools. Today, I just want to pick out a few key documents which highlight the important role of effective PSHE. For the statutory elements of PSHE, which are relationships education, relationships and sex education, and health education, are central to teaching about the well-being and security of children and young people, and are referenced throughout the document, the DfE document, Keeping Children Safe in Education. Further to that, the PSHE Association Programme of Study for PSHE provides us with a rich and holistic series of learning opportunities that span Key Stage 1 up to Key Stage 5 and inclusive of Key Stage 5. And it's from this that an effective and needs-based PSHE curriculum can be developed. The statutory DfE guidance for relationships education, relationships and sex education and health education sets out what must be covered within a state-funded school curriculum. Relationships education is compulsory for all pupils receiving primary education, and relationships and sex education is compulsory for all pupils receiving secondary education, as all schools, including independent schools. Health education is compulsory in all schools except independent schools, due to the fact that PSHE has been compulsory in independent schools for a number of years. Okay, so applying an evidence base, and I'm just thinking, if you're sitting there in your staff groups now, I'm just wondering if you've already established a safe environment in which to take part in this training. So I'm really hoping that you've done that. But establishing a safe environment is absolutely essential to it's an essential part of the evidence-based approach to PSHE. So developing your ground rules or your group agreement for safe learning environment, sometimes called a learning agreement, and that also underpins the safety within that, also underpins the use of distancing techniques. And through a lot of your PSHE lessons, you should be applying distancing techniques. Maybe for some schools and some year groups, maybe use of puppets, and in other schools and year groups, applying things to characters or within stories or text, especially through literacy text that you may be studying in other subjects. So it does provide that element of safety. The onus is not directly on the pupil, it's giving that element of distance and safety. And at the end of this training today, I will be signposting staff to the Surrey Healthy Schools web pages, where you can find a 10-minute CPD session on how to effectively establish ground rules in your school. Your ground rules should be complementary to your school culture, your behaviour and relationships, and what you foster in your schools. And some schools really want to put the two together, so they have developed ground rules for PSHE from their values, and they've negotiated those with the pupils. And you can see on the screen now an example of a school that's done that. They've taken their school values and then they've worked with their pupils to look at positive ways that they will foster that behaviour underpinned by the value and use that to create their safe learning environment through PSHE.
Another way that evidence-based practice comes into play in PSHE lessons is through something that Sarah and I have talked long and hard about, the concept of mitigation. What we're effectively trying to do in PSHE, and this is what all of the research backs up, is to help children and young people thrive in life. And one way to do that is to support them in trying to reduce the severity, seriousness or painfulness of something. But that doesn't sound particularly positive. However, I think that's a really good basis from which to start to say, okay, if you teach X, it will mitigate the impact of Y. So if we teach around something or about something, it will help to reduce the severity, seriousness or painfulness of something, perhaps now in a child's life or perhaps later into adulthood. Now, that doesn't mean that everything has to be about making a clear path for children all the way through their lives, but it definitely helps us to ask ourselves this question. Because a lot of PSHE is all about, in the past anyway, has been all about don't do that. But actually what we're trying to say to children is, okay, how do you think about risk or exploratory behaviour in your life, and how do you mitigate the seriousness of it? So for us as adults around children, for those of you teaching children in PSHE, it might be interesting to ask yourself the question, how do you ensure that you don't teach head on all of the time? Don't do that, don't do that. It's a way of supporting children with their development, but not making it scary. And it links very much back to what Sarah said earlier about that PSHE is not there to shock or scare children out of doing something. So asking yourself the question, how do you ensure you don't teach head on all of the time, is a really good place to start when we think about the term mitigation. Now, if you are required to teach about something, there are certain ways that we would suggest this might be helpful to relate it back to. We would always have the starting point of everything in PSHE being about a pupil's relationship with themselves. And that's not to sound too therapeutic in nature. It's really just to say, okay, how do I feel about myself, first of all, and how does that therefore have an impact on the choices that I make in life? Another way to look at the idea of not approaching things head on is to ask the question, what would I like to see instead? And that can be a pupil saying that can be a parent, a carer, any other adult in a child's life. What would we like to see instead? Rather than don't do that, do this. We know from history that that does not really work very well. Linking back to what Sarah said about a strengths-based approach as well, what do we want to see more of? If a child or children are working hard on something and they are making progress, we would like them to see and to appreciate what more of that would look like, so that they can see that progress is made and that they know that further progress can be made in the future. We really do need to focus on positive messages rather than don't do that. It doesn't work, and all of the evidence says that that does not work either. So we focus on strengths-based approaches, trauma-informed approaches, normative approaches, which Sarah has already explained. In all of this though, when we're asked to teach around or about a certain topic, we need to ensure it's relevant to a pupil's life. If it's completely irrelevant, they'll just switch off, because it doesn't mean anything to them. So try, if possible, to make it relevant to a child's life. And in that respect, you're going to be meeting their needs in some ways too. Then, what Sarah has already mentioned about is the fact of school values being so important in PSHE, and the fact that they need to link together. The PSHE curriculum very much needs to link to your school values, because that symbiotic relationship will have a really positive impact on the positive behaviours that we want to see, particularly in how we speak to each other and how PSHE lessons are facilitated. And then a final point to think about if we're required to teach about something or around something is to remember where we are now. in the modern 21st century life, where perhaps as adults we've grown up very much thinking that there is a big difference between online and offline skills, when in fact to the children and young people of today there is not such a great distinction between the two. So in terms of the skills that we're trying to facilitate in children and rehearse in a safe environment, they're going to be very similar, whether they're online or offline. And of course that links very much to the digital literacy work that's going on in schools at the moment. So always go through this list if you can. Make sure that you're doing all of these things. If you're required to teach about anything, relate it back to all of these elements first.
Thank you. I'm so interested. I forgot where I was. Okay, so moving on to one of the other aspects of PSHE, universal prevention. So just to recognise that the curriculum subject of PSHE assists learning, and it assists supporting something called universal prevention. And PSHE is a regular curriculum class-based subject, as any other subject, and it should be relevant and supportive of all pupils in a class. And in a class you've generally got 26, 28, 30 pupils, so that what you do must be relevant to all of those pupils. In itself, PSHE is not an intervention unless you were to do some additional or more targeted work with maybe an identified group of pupils, which would be further to your general curriculum. So just make sure that when you're planning your PSHE, you're thinking, is it suitable and relevant for all of my pupils in my class? And it supports your universal prevention. If you start moving into the grounds of more intervention work, then that would only be maybe suitable for a small population of your pupils. And providing a pupil lens is a really important part of this. PSHE can help to address fundamental skills, attitudes, values and concepts underpinning a wide range of highly significant issues, as you can see on the slide. But what these issues mean to an adult and what they mean to a young person can be quite different. If you think about consent to maybe a 16-year-old, an 18-year-old or an adult will be significantly different to what consent means to a 6-year-old, an 8-year-old or a 4-year-old. For a 4-year-old, it could be, can I borrow your pencil? Can I borrow your skipping rope? Can I play football? Whatever it might be. And the consent and the respect could be on that level, which is very likely. So it's really important that you put a pupil lens, a pupil perspective, when you as an adult are thinking about a range of issues that come at us in a raft of guidance documentation that we have. And thinking about, for example, turn taking, reflecting, listening, resolving problems peaceably, thinking about equality and positive relationships, careers, education and aspiration, all of those things that may well be going on in your school is very much likely to reduce or help reduce many of the issues that are on that slide. So if you're focusing on equality, positive relationships, resolving problems peaceably, articulation, communication, aspiration, all of those things, you will be also working to reduce inequality. You'll be working to reduce domestic abuse, and a raft of things on that form. As a very general example, but you have the power within your school curriculum, with your PSHE curriculum and your school culture, to impact upon a range of these issues, and with PSHE in a proactive and planned way.
And another aspect of PSHE, something that Sarah and I are both great advocates for, is active teaching and learning. I will stress very strongly here that this is not about being an entertainment for children necessarily. I think we've stepped away from that. Engagement is certainly a very different thing. And I do think that engaging actively in PSHE is essential. It's about feeling it rather than just learning it by rote effectively. The strategies that we've got on the slide are just a few of the active teaching and learning methods that you're probably already using, and they are absolutely appropriate and suitable for primary and secondary. More information about all of these can be found on the Surrey PSHE guidance on the PSHE section of the website, and there is a link to that later on. But I just wanted to mention a little bit about what the point of active teaching and learning methods is all about. It helps to provide structure and a framework under which children can really spend time thinking. I like to use the term considering or pondering by themselves, in a pair, in a group, whatever that might look like. And it's really there to increase or enhance the effectiveness of teaching and learning in all curriculum subjects. It doesn't just have to be about PSHE. It really provides, I think, an opportunity to develop key personal skills and qualities. And also these methods of teaching and learning are just a little bit more interesting. You'll see here that there's no mention of worksheets. Now, that's not to say that a worksheet can't be used in an active teaching and learning way, but all of these are a little bit more involved for children. So it engages them, it gives them a chance to reflect, to discuss. It gives them also a chance to rehearse in a safe and positive environment their social skills, like turn taking, in a way that isn't one-on-one necessarily. Also, lots of other social and emotional skills can be practiced in these examples and so many others. But I think the overriding thing about active teaching and learning methods is that they promote safety. And that's physical safety as well as psychological safety. So really important for children to feel safe in an environment where they are learning. And that brings us back to distancing techniques, which is what Sarah mentioned earlier. How distancing techniques depersonalise the situation so that children can feel very much that they are able to discuss a particular situation or idea without it being about them, that they can take it away from themselves and depersonalise or create a safety barrier so that it's not about them, it's about somebody else. And that could be, as Sarah's already mentioned, characters, storyboards, scenarios, puppets, picture books, all kinds of different things. So it is for everybody, and it's about making it work to meet the needs of everybody in your class.
Thank you. Okay, so moving on to another aspect within PSHE, assessment. And I just wonder, when you're reflecting on your practice in your school, how you are viewing assessment in PSHE and what you have in place already. So I kept the diagram really simple. There's many diagrams out there. There's many sorts of models of assessment, but I just kept the diagram to the main elements of assessment. But basically, what we need to be thinking about is assessment on a very broad term. So we use the word assessment, the term assessment, to refer to all of the activities undertaken by teachers and by the pupils themselves in assessing where they're at. And that provides information to be used as feedback. And then that should impact and maybe modify teaching and learning activities and your planning as a teacher. So we're thinking about assessment in a very broad term. And assessment is inextricably linked to teaching and learning. And it really, good teaching and learning, you can't take assessment out of good teaching and learning. It is absolutely elements that cannot be taken apart. And assessment is about identifying pupil need, which we've talked about, or we will be talking about more. It's about planning effective teaching and learning opportunities, using a variety of assessment techniques and using this to inform your future planning. So absolutely, assessment is at the heart of everything, but it's more than just data, it's more than just numbers, and it's so much more than just giving somebody a test or a quiz or something like that. It's also really important that when we're looking at assessment and pupils are looking at their goals and what their targets are, that they are achievable, and that a classroom culture sees ability as incremental, that it can be built upon, which links back to the strengths-based approach that we talked about earlier. And it's got to, and that helps also with young people's aspiration, the fact that they can move forward and they know how to do that. And they need to be able to see that ability is movable, and it is not a fixed position, it is incremental. So effective planning, teaching and learning works to close the gap between where the pupil is in its present state of understanding and the learning goal, and that process should involve the pupils. They should be part of that assessment and teaching and learning process. And your school's approach to assessment should be captured within your PSHE policy and also within your assessment policy as well, and possibly within your teaching and learning policy, depending on how you set your policies out. All subject taught should be reported upon. An effective assessment in PSHE will aid an accurate pupil view of their current ability, future development and ways of progressing, helping the pupils to develop the skills to become and aspire and being long-term learners, lifelong learners even. So, and just to go back to that bit about having an accurate view of the pupils, your effective assessment will also assist in your recording and reporting. What does assessment look like? I could do a course on assessment in itself, really, I suppose, but it is about meeting the needs of pupils in an effective and progressive way. And that means you need to recognise where the baseline is, where are the pupils at that point in time. And we often use the term baseline assessment. That can be drawn right activities, it can be basic talk partner activities, it can be quizzes, it could be all sorts of things that just set out that baseline of pupil ability and pupil need. It is also about having really clear lesson outcomes as well, and outcomes that address knowledge, understanding, skills, and will also positively impact upon the development and reflection on attitudes and values. Assessment for learning. It's about checking in with the pupils throughout the session, listening into conversations, watching what they're doing, what they're drawing, what they're writing, just looking even at their body language and how they're reacting to maybe some of the situations or the questions or just the general discussions. And that you may well be doing just as part and parcel of your daily teaching and learning, and not even really always recognising that it is actually part of the assessment process. But the more you reflect on that and are aware of that, the better and more thorough your assessment will be. And I just put down some basic, think, pair and share, listening in, unpicking, and doing that with the plenary as well, when you're going back and looking at the lesson objectives that were set out right at the beginning of a lesson, maybe reiterating them partway through the lesson, maybe reiterating at the end of the session, and just getting some talk partner work going so that the pupils can actually think about how well they've achieved those outcomes as well. And you can capture these things in so many ways. The pupil books, if they've developed posters, and as it says on there, photographic evidence. There's so many different ways of capturing that so that you know where each and every one of your pupils are with their learning and their development needs in PSHE.
Now these next couple of slides are really lists of things that make up high quality PSHE. And yet we are delving a little bit deeper into the aspects of PSHE now, but these are all sorts of points that we think are really important. It'll be no surprise that we return to this, start where children are. Sarah's already mentioned a lot about that, so I won't go on. There's a bit more just in a few slides' time about a spiral programme, so I will cover that then. What I think, though, is really important is that we keep coming back to taking a positive, strengths-based approach, one where there is no room for children to feel implored to have a sense of shock, guilt or fear about anything. Trauma-informed is a compassionate approach, it is a kind approach. It is also an approach that recognises we might not know everything about children. So rather than attempting to induce shock, guilt or fear, we can teach in different ways. We don't have to scare children away from certain things. We teach them about the relationship with themselves, first of all, and why it is so important that they stay safe and well, that they deserve to stay safe and well. We always provide a safe and supportive, positive learning environment, and we keep sticking to the ground rules. It's really important that we don't just glibly fly over them at the start of the lesson. They are there for our safety as staff members, as well as for children. A wide variety of teaching and learning styles is just the hallmark of any good lesson in any subject. But in PSHE, I think it can sometimes get a little bit, right, let's have a debate. And sometimes I think we need to move on from a debate isn't just the only way to look at things. What we also need to ensure is that the information that we provide is realistic, absolutely realistic to children, and it's relevant to them as well. But I think at another level to that, it really reinforces positive social norms. And Sarah spoke about that at the start of this training. We can't have children thinking that what they're doing is very different from what everybody else is doing, when in fact the data tells us it's actually very similar. So we need to reinforce the positive social norms. Most children are thriving most of the time in most places. Added to this, we really do need to encourage children to have a sense of reflection on their learning, on their progress, so that they can see what progress has been made, but also that they can recognise further progress can be made. It's not just a static point that they reach, they can go beyond that. And to know that in the whole of PSHE, it's not just about what they're learning in PSHE that counts, it's that they can transfer this skill base, this knowledge to other areas of the school curriculum and other areas of life as well. Really crucial that they notice the links that can be made. And speaking of links, it's really crucial also to ensure that the wider PSHE education curriculum links to other whole school approaches, so SMSC, spiritual, moral, social, cultural development opportunities, your safeguarding and your pastoral support in school. Now, these are just a few examples. This is not an exhaustive list. I think this is possibly what some teachers in my experience who I've spoken to have found to be a ponderous point. How do they make their setting, so their classroom, their school, the place where the responsible choice becomes the easy choice? And it's a question that's really worth asking ourselves. And this is really getting into the depths of PSHE. But so often when we teach children about healthier choices, more responsible choices, we come at it from an adult perspective, having gone through all of the milestones of childhood development. When actually, as Sarah mentioned earlier, we need to look at it through a child's lens, through a pupil's lens, so that we're not making it about adults, we're making it about children. And often children don't make a responsible choice because it's not the easiest one for them. So how do we as adults support children to make the responsible choice the easier choice? One of the best things about PSHE, and you can probably tell that Sarah and I love PSHE with all of our hearts, it really offers children an opportunity to make real decisions about their lives in a safe and positive learning environment, so they can rehearse things in the classroom, in the playground, in school, which may well be a safer place to them than other places in their lives. Or it might not. But it is also really important to recognise that these real decisions about life have to be practiced, first of all, in order for those skills to become really embedded. And then finally, our last point on this one is all about linking to the Surrey Healthy Schools themes and standards. Sarah has already spoken about that at the start, but what I wanted to ensure is that all of this isn't just seen as, oh, it's PSHE. It doesn't link to anything else. PSHE has fingers in every pie, if you like, and one of the best things that you can do is link this all together under the themes and standards of the Surrey Healthy Schools approach. Another element that we really wanted to focus on, and this is getting into sort of the depths of PSHE, really, the detailed aspects, is the idea of non-judgmental facilitation. We very much advocate that teaching of PSHE is one thing, facilitation of the skills is another. And I think in order to be able to be a really skilled facilitator in PSHE, there comes with it a sense of being non-judgmental. Now, this isn't to say that you aren't informing yourself about what children need. It absolutely is. But it's about seeing it from a very universal perspective. So the question really is, how do you ensure pupil needs are met when you have such an array of needs in the classroom? And these needs are often to do with knowledge, skills and understanding. So children will, in your class, there will be some with zero existing knowledge, skills and understanding. A few children may have a bit of knowledge. They might have a few skills. They might have some understanding. And I think in that we also have to acknowledge that there may be some myths that might need to be challenged too. And then you're going to have children who've got lots of knowledge, lots of skills, lots of understanding about particular things, whether that's relevant or appropriate for their age and stage of development or not. So what we need to do as skilled teachers in this, or skilled facilitators, is come at it from a non-judgmental perspective and say, there's going to be a range of things available in my class. How can I facilitate to best cover everything that children need? And one of the ways to do that is to repeat things, rehearse things, but building on that. And this is where the spiral curriculum comes into play. This is all about making sure that we are progressing children's skills, knowledge, understanding, values, and we are developing them. We are facilitating this in children. So this is almost an iterative revisiting of things in PSHE throughout the whole of a course, whatever that might look like, a programme. Now, I have used the term repetition, but it's not just simply that. It has to be cyclical. It has to increase its depth, its breadth, and it has to build on prior knowledge. So for the next slide, it shows us one of the ways that you can do this through drug education. And this is from what's on currently the Surrey Healthy Schools web pages in the PSHE section. We'll start at the bottom in early years. With the youngest of children in formal education, what we need to support them with right at the start is well, there's lots of different things, but one of these is that they need to know that there is some equipment in the classroom or at home, some resources in the classroom at home that could be harmful if they are used inappropriately. And I think that if needs to be underlined. It's not all use is inappropriate and therefore harmful. It's if it's used inappropriately. And we build on that into Key Stage 1. One of my favourite phrases of all time is that all medicines are drugs, but not all drugs are medicines. And to make that distinction for children is a way to open up their understanding of the world in a very safe and child-friendly way. All substances can be harmful if they're not used properly, and we know this from early years, but we're building upon it. Similarly, in Key Stage 2, we look at the positive and negative uses of drugs in society. And of course, that includes the safe use of prescribed and over-the-counter medicines too. Equally, we build on this into Key Stages 3 and 4. We're starting to add a bit more breadth and depth, scientific terminology, definitely. And then in Key Stage 4, we look more at the behavioural side of things. But we have to have the grounding, first of all. Early years, Key Stage 1, Key Stage 2 are the forerunners of what we find in Key Stage 3 and Key Stage 4. We cannot teach effectively in the upper key stages if we haven't done the groundwork in the early stages. And it's the same with every single subject. PSHE is no different.
So moving on to another aspect, working with external contributors. So where appropriate, you may decide to include supportive expertise from other people. You might have identified specific staff or pupil needs, and you may then approach somebody to come in and support your work. An external contributor may be able to provide expert knowledge and or staff training, CPD, but it's really important that the school is clear about the needs that they are addressing, what you're asking them to do, and how that external contributor may aid your identified needs and developments and progress the abilities of the pupils or the school staff or the curriculum or whatever it is that you are trying to develop further. Where an external contributor is supporting work within a classroom environment or within a lesson context, it should be central and remain that the teacher is the expert in teaching and is also the most knowledgeable about those pupils. And they are also the person that is aware of the school policies, procedures, protocols, including relationships, behaviour and safeguarding. So it's really important that when you do work with other people, that to remember that the role of the classroom teacher and any assistants in that room are absolutely central to working with the external person, but again, still remaining in charge of all of those procedural and policy elements. And it would be a really helpful thing to also some of the key policies or excerpts from the key policies to be shared with the person coming in and supporting your work in your classrooms. Effective communication should take place between an external contributor and the school prior to any visit, and goals and outcomes and roles and responsibilities should be agreed in advance, and that will help people to know their roles and their boundaries and what they are there to do. And there is additional guidance on the PSHE page in the PSHE guidance about how to effectively work with external contributors, and there's a helpful checklist for that as well. And moving on to a further aspect, in fact, actually our final aspect on our list is about providing support and signposting. PSHE is a fantastic place to incorporate signposting, appropriate signposting for your pupils, and it can be done in a planned and proactive way. And if you're doing, I mean, Joanna's just been talking about a spiralling curriculum around keeping safe around drugs and developing knowledge around drugs, part of your drug education, health education. Then when you're talking on a secondary level, it may be that you incorporate signposting to any pastoral support you have in school. First and foremost, what support there is, who a pupil can talk to at school if they're concerned, or whether it's about themselves or another person, and also to external services. Maybe in Surrey, it might be providing the details of the Catch 22, young people's drug misuse support service, or it could be the Talk to Frank website as well, so that in particular secondary age pupils can then maybe find out a little bit more should they feel the need to do that. So again, building that into your lesson so it's not artificially plopped onto your curriculum or within an assembly. It's actually part and parcel of your lesson, and then all pupils get that information and advice, whether you as a teacher may have thought that they needed it or not, because we're never always 100% sure who requires more and who would benefit from knowing more, because it might not be always that they want to know more for themselves. It could be that they want to know more to support other people. So whatever the reasons, PSHE is a great place to provide effective and appropriate signposting. And again, remembering what we were saying earlier about a pupil lens and what might be age and stage appropriate. And again, schools themselves have got so many things to offer. You may have wellbeing ambassadors, you might have peer mediation, you might have buddy benches. There's so many things that actually you could incorporate within your lesson. that you're doing. And then just to highlight that in the Surrey Healthy Schools self-evaluation tool, there is a massive amount of signposting that you could lift and put into some of your lessons. There's a lot of appropriate signposting for pupils contained within the self-evaluation tool, so you can look at that and take it out as and when appropriate.
So that's us having delved into a few aspects of PSHE. I'm not going to say they're the most important, because that would be inappropriate. There are so many things that are also important that we haven't included here. So our further 2 training sessions are going to cover some of those things as well. But I think it's worth saying that these are a great place to start, to be thinking about all of these collaboratively. There's not one that's more important than the other necessarily. We've gone through them in some detail, but of course there's always more detail if you would like. So the Surrey Healthy Schools web pages can offer you some more support if you'd like it.
Which you can see there. We've got all sorts of different sections on there. There is the news section to keep you up to date. There's a PSHE specific section. And then there is also a section around taking your healthy schools approach. And there's other services, other sections, further to that as well. So just to bring this session together a little bit, I'm sure that as we've been going through, you've been thinking about your own provision in school and your own confidence levels, where you're strong in confidence and maybe where you could do with a little bit more subject knowledge. So just thinking, as we've been going through, how do you recognise and work to meet the needs of pupils? Because you'll be doing an awful lot of that already. So where are you already doing that well? And what is it that we've said that's made you think about how you could possibly take that on that little bit further? If you're a PSHE leader, how are you identifying good practice across your school? If you're not PSHE leader and you just teach PSHE, how do you know when you've developed and delivered a really effective lesson? And what do you do reflecting after that? How do you make sure that you capitalise on that and take that forwards and really develop? So what are you already doing well? What could be developed further? And how do you ensure a whole school, and across Surrey, whole system approach to PSHE and beyond? So I'm sure you'll be thinking already about that, and you'll also be thinking about some of your next steps. And with that in mind, all we would like to do is just thank you for your time and your attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you.